And we are live. Hello and welcome to the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network. My name is Jonah Shiffman. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, John Kelly. We're going to be talking UFC Vegas 39 going down at the Apex in Las Vegas, Nevada. This weekend, we got a strawweight main event. Pretty good fight between Mackenzie, Deron, and Mariya Rodriguez. I think it is a stylistic clash, to say the least. We only have 10 fights on the card, so this will likely be a little bit of a shorter show than normal, but 10 fights. We'll break them all down on the show. John, before we get into the first of 10, how are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, I'm doing good, man. Always happy to have football back as well. So that keeps me going throughout the weeks when after the fight cards and stuff like that. So I definitely can't complain there. And then even though the card's not the greatest, at least we got fights. Some fights are better than none. You know, we have a couple kind of suspect cards for the next couple of weeks. I know you're not the biggest fan, but I'm always happy to find some spots on some lower level fights. And then obviously leading up to the end of the month, we have the master big fight card, UFC 267 at Fight Island. So it's a good time to be a fight fan. Excited to break down the fights with you. Got a lot to talk about, even on these 10 fights. Have a decent amount of action this week. So curious to hear your thoughts on some of these matchups.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned, like, I make fun of all the fight cards on Twitter, but I'm a sick pup, as you would say, John. I'll be watching. Most likely, I'll be watching the card. It's my anniversary this week with my girlfriend, so I might not make the card. But you know, I'm watching all these low level fights, and you'll be at the card UFC 267 at Fight Island later this month. I'll be at UFC 268 the following week in New York City. So the Undisputed Boys will be well represented when there are actual good fights later this month. But despite the fact that there are no really good high-level fights this weekend, there are 10 fights, 10 opportunities to make money. Let's get right into it, John. We got a first fight of the night. We got Steve Garcia, minus 310 favorite here against Charlie Ontiveros. Ontiveros comes back plus 260, 7.1K, coming off of his UFC debut where he sustained that kind of scary neck/back injury against Kevin Holland. Quick KO loss there. Steve Garcia only has one fight inside of the UFC. He did not show much in his debut either, although stiff testing Luis Pena was controlled for a lot of that fight. I believe Pena had over 14 minutes of control time. Obviously, only a 15-minute fight. Unanimous decision loss for Garcia, but a big price tag for a guy who has not won at the UFC level. But if you go back and watch some Charlie Ontiveros tape, you know, I think there's a chance that this number might be justified. This is a guy who's been knocked out. You know, depending where you look, there's kind of a difference in Ontiveros' record, but he's been knocked out in either all 7 of his knockout losses or in 6 of 7 of his knockout losses. And regardless of what the number is, this guy mostly eats punches.
We may have lost
karate style kicking game that is.
Jonah, can you hear me? Uh-oh. Are you back now?
Yeah, we might have cut out for a second. Can you hear me?
Yeah. So right when you said karate style kicking game, you froze for like 15 seconds.
Yeah, well, that's kind of all I said about the guy. There isn't much else to say about Charlie Ontiveros. I don't think he has a ton of redeeming qualities and skill set. And before I'll kick it to you guys, just apologize that we're a bit late. We're dealing with technical issues between power outages and internet outages, and that's going on us. But we're doing our best to bring the show to you guys. John, I'll kick the first fight to you. Garcia versus Ontiveros. Any strong take here?
Yeah, for those, because you cut out briefly again, for those that didn't hear, just a little bit of technical difficulties. I think it's windy in Colorado. And we're pretty long distance from each other, so it looks like internet's not cooperating a ton tonight. So I apologize for that if you guys are hearing any type of lag. But yeah, actually, I do have a bet on this fight. I played the under 2.5 at minus 164 on FanDuel. I just think, like you mentioned, a lot of the concern with Charlie Ontiveros, but I think he's your prototypical like kill or be killed type of fighter. And typically more really just a be killed type of fighter.
Right.
But he does have a little bit of finishing potential here. Steve Garcia is powerful, though. Like you said, he didn't get to show much in his debut because Luis Pena basically was on his back the entire fight. But he is a power puncher. 8 of his 11 wins have come by knockout. And you mentioned the main thing is Ontiveros just doesn't have the durability. So I played the under. I'd be shocked if we see this fight go over 2.5 at minus 164. I think there's still value on that. Last I checked, it was available still on FanDuel. All 4 of Ontiveros' last four fights ended in the first round. like all but one of his last 8 fights ended inside the first 2. Like he's likely going to get knocked out here again. But again, he might have a little bit of finishing potential himself. I just think the style of this matchup leads to a finish a lot more times than minus 164 indicates. So I played the under 2.5 minus 164 to win 1 unit. And that's the only bet I have for this fight.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the most well-versed guy in terms of Steve Garcia. I watched him on Contender Series. I watched him in his debut. I taped him before that fight. His striking style is decent. He moves forward a lot, throws decently hard for the weight class. Like, I expect him to get Charlie Ontiveros out of there this weekend. If I had to make a play on the fight, I think the under is the correct way to look. But ultimately, I think it'll be no action for me in the current Jerker this weekend. Let's move on to the second fight. I mean, look, if we're going to have 10 fights like that, we're going to be out here in 25 minutes at this rate. Second fight of the evening, we got Lupita Godinez, minus 330 favorite here against, I believe we're going to go with Juarez as her name. There's a bunch of different names out there, but Silvana Gomez Juarez. Short notice debutante this weekend against Godinez. She's a plus 270 underdog. In terms of DraftKings pricing for this fight, Godinez at 8.6K, which obviously a cheap price considering the fact that she's a minus 300 favorite in the betting market. I'm sure we'll talk about that kind of as we go on looking through this fight. One thing to note is in terms of Juarez, there's no price on DraftKings for her yet. I assume she will come in as one of the less expensive fighters on the card, maybe at that like $7.2 thousand range. But regardless, she'll be relatively cheap when that price does come out. Godinez is someone who's underpriced on DraftKings. John, I'll let you go first here. Any thoughts just kind of on the styles between these two women? Were you able to go back and watch some tape on Juarez? What are you expecting in this fight? And then I guess we'll talk about DFS soon thereafter.
Yeah, I mean, I did a little bit of tape study. I didn't go super in depth. I think she's fine. Like, I do think it's kind of weird. Like, she turns, 38 in December or something like that, making her UFC debut. Yeah, so I mean, you don't see that often. She was supposed to fight on Contender Series, I guess, so it's not super short notice. But I mean, I think she's okay. She has both of her losses have come against UFC fighters, Botello and Ariana Lipski is the other one. She does have a win over Vanessa Mello years ago on the regional scene, but that was like 7 years ago. I mean, she looks fine. I watched her most recent fight. She's an okay striker. Can be taken down, though. I just think this is a tough spot for her against Godinez, who I would say it's a buy low spot on Godinez, but the odds don't represent that whatsoever because she's a massive favorite here. But in terms of how I think she'll look, I think it's sort of a buy low spot in theory, is just because she wasn't able to showcase her best self when she was defensively grappling the entire fight against Jessica Penne. And I just think Godinez is a better boxer. She's more powerful. I think she's likely to land takedowns here if the fight goes to the mat. But yeah, I just think Godinez is probably a little bit better everywhere. I've seen some people consider Juarez as a live dog. I honestly couldn't get there. I think Godinez probably boxes her up on the feet for the majority and then maybe lands a takedown or two. So yeah, I think Godinez is the side. I do think there's better targets on DraftKings. Like, I don't think she has a massive ceiling or really a massive floor either, because if this just turns into a striking match and we don't see a finish, she probably scores like 75 in a win.
Yeah, so I think you touched on a couple of good points here that I'll kind of elaborate on as we go through. I actually watched Juarez's last fight because I saw someone posted on Twitter. I forget who it was. And I mean, it's some of the worst refereeing you'll ever see. Like, we had people complaining about like the Herb Dean stoppage, right? Or lack thereof of stoppage in the Alexandr Volkanovski versus Brian Ortega title fight 2 weeks ago. Like, you could see the beating that this referee let Juarez's opponent take in her last fight, which was like not a main event, not even the biggest Mexican fighting promotion, like just a terrible referee job. So I'd seen her fight before, went back, I watched a little bit of tape. You know, I think she's decent. Like, I think she can win fights at the UFC level. Certainly 37 years old or 36, turning 37 next month is not a great spot to be at in your career in terms of making your debut. Obviously taking the fight, I think it's a week earlier. She was supposed to be on Contender Series next week. So she's taking the fight just a little bit before she was supposed to. I expect her to be, you know, remotely competitive at the UFC level. I think this is a tough matchup for her. You mentioned like Godinez has good hands. I don't think she's going to be able to be, you know, I don't think Juarez is going to be able to take down Godinez in this fight, which is really what we saw her struggle with in that UFC debut for Godinez, who I think has decent hands. She's small, but I think she hits decently hard. She puts her combos together well on the feet. So I'll pick Godinez here. In terms of the DraftKings pricing, with 10 fights on the card, oftentimes we talk about, look, these are the leverage spots on the card. This is where you can get upside at super low ownership. The fact of the matter is, when we have 10 fights on the card, ownership is inflated across the board, right? Because no matter how many fights there are on the card, all the fighters, when we combine their ownership together, has to equal 600% because it's 100% for 6 roster spots. And when you divide that by 20 fighters on the card, that means that the average ownership is going to shake out to like 30% per fighter. Whereas it doesn't sound like much, but if you have 26 fighters on the card, the average ownership is like 22%. That's an 8% difference. Doesn't sound like a ton, like I said, but in reality, that's a lot. So everyone's going to be higher owned across the board. And I actually think that means you should be eating some more chalk in places like Alexandr Romanov, which we'll get to in a couple of fights, where I just think his upside is so much higher than anyone else on the card. And like with Valentina Shevchenko 2 weeks ago, we saw her fight and she had massive upside, was a huge favorite to win inside the distance. But we had fighters on that card in her price range that I thought could match her, like Matheus in that spot. I don't think there's that spot on this card. So what I'll say, just kind of bringing this back to the Godinez fight, is I expect her to be chalky. And this is actually one of the few spots on the card that I want to get different, because I'm going to be eating chalk with Alexandr Romanov at the top of the DraftKings pricing. And I don't want to share, a min cash in DraftKings tournaments with 400 of my best friends or whatever, all having the same lineup as me. So a spot where I think you get a little different this weekend is everyone's going to see Godinez $8.6 thousand, minus 300 favorite, and they're all going to rush to play her. And like John, like you mentioned, man, like if she wins a low volume striking decision here, like there's no lock that she makes the optimal lineup, even if more than half of the winners on Saturday are going to end up being optimal. So long-winded way of saying I'm picking Godinez, but I think that you can kind of do better on DraftKings, especially considering the fact that I expect her to be one of the more higher owned fighters come Saturday night. John, you have anything here kind of from a DFS perspective to add on, or should we move on to our next fight?
No, I think that's a really good point. It's not even that it has to be like super low volume. Like even if she throws decent volume, like we just, with the new scoring as of the beginning of the year, like we just know that even in like a semi-high volume striking match, like she's probably not going to score enough to be optimal. And it is a 10-fight slate, so there's a little bit of wiggle room there. But I just think in general, if she's going to be one of the most popular fighters on the slate, then I think being underweight is probably the correct move.
Yeah, and I mean, 10-fight slates get weird. Like, there's a chance no underdog wins, so someone wins with stacking a fight that has a loser if it's high scoring, or just a loser in general. So we'll talk about that kind of throughout. It'll be a recurring theme throughout the show. But let's move on to our third fight of the night. We got Damon Jackson minus 185 against Charles Rosa plus 160. As the underdog here, Jackson $8.4 thousand, Charles Rosa 7.8 on DraftKings. And this is a fight that opened a lot closer to a pick'em, or not open, but for a while was sitting a lot closer to a pick'em. And at the time, I kind of thought, before diving deep into it, before doing tape, I thought that Charles Rosa would potentially be a decent look here. I kind of circled back around to it. Don't think that so much. And a lot of people whose opinions I value, especially in terms of the grappling, are pretty heavy on Damon Jackson here. And it's to the point where I think the market may have gone a little bit far. That he's minus 200 almost at this point, but I do think that Damon Jackson deserves to be a favorite here over Charles Rosa. I think he's the better wrestler. I think he's more likely to kind of land on top, rack up top control here. Charles Rosa, we always talk about, or everyone always talks about, he's a black belt, but the fact of the matter with him being a black belt is the only time we really get to see him use it is to fend off submissions. It feels like every single fight, this guy's in some sort of deep submission, and his submission defense, pure sub defense, is really good. Like, it is really hard to tap this guy out, but he spends a lot of time on his back. And the fact of the matter is, when we're betting on fights, if you're betting on straight money lines, a loss by submission is the same exact thing as a loss by decision. You know what I mean? So, like, we need Charles Rosa and the guys we're betting on to spend time on their feet trying to win minutes here. And I think that there's a decent chance that Damon Jackson lands on top. I'm kind of curious, John, what you think in terms of the striking here, because Charles Rosa, his striking isn't pretty per se, but he does have kind of a history of being able to outpoint his opponents, even though it doesn't necessarily look like that visually. He's gotten some nods on judges' scorecards. Kind of, what do you make of the striking here? Because I don't view Damon Jackson as a plus striker, and Charles Rosa has had some success in the striking realm, at least in terms of how the judges view it.
Yeah, I think it's kind of almost like a 50-50 fight. Like, I mean, Rosa, I've never really been a fan of Charles Rosa. Like like you said, he's a black belt, decent grappler, but always spends time on his back. He'll play off his back looking for submissions, and sometimes he'll get there. He subbed Manny Bermudez off his back. I think he's had one or two others. But I mean, I could never justify. Yeah, Pepe in the chat just basically said, like, I can't really justify laying that big of a number on Damon Jackson, who I also don't think is that good. Like, I think his striking is probably worse than Charles Rosa. And Charles Rosa is not someone that I respect in terms of the striking. But like you said, he at least is technical enough. He has good enough movement to where he was outpointing even Shane Burgos on the feet at times. So it's like, can he outpoint Damon Jackson? I think so. And Damon Jackson is pretty similar to Rosa in that he'll flop to his back, play off his back. Like, I do agree with you that Jackson is probably more likely of the two to spend time in top position, but I'm not laying minus 190 confident in that to happen. So it's just one of those things where maybe 50-50 is being a little bit too optimistic for Rosa. Like, I didn't bet Charles Rosa. I'm not going to bet Charles Rosa, but I do think he's a live underdog because these two guys are kind of just similar styles of each other in that they're both not great strikers. They're both, tend to be controlled on the mat, on their back, even though they're opportunistic grapplers. Like, I just don't think that Jackson has the grappling or the wrestling of a Derek Minner, Bryce Mitchell, not even close on that. And,
Right.
and I think you're seeing a price tag to where he sort of has to implement that same game plan. And I'm just not convinced that he will. So I think Rosa's live in terms of the betting market, but again, I didn't bet it. And in terms of DraftKings, this one I think has a wide range of outcomes. Like, if this turns into like mostly a striking match, these guys are going to score terribly on DraftKings. But if it turns into like a bunch of grappling exchanges and scrambles on the mat, then that's where we could see, 3 or 4 takedowns on one side, some control time. So I just think there's a really wide range of outcomes. So I won't fade the fight completely, but I'm also not making either of these guys a core piece. It's just not one of my better takes on the entire card.
I think that's fair. I mostly agree with you that it's kind of outlandish to lay the price on Damon Jackson. I certainly won't be doing it myself at this point. I think if you got in early, that's reasonable. Because you mentioned, John, like, they are similar fighters. But to me, I think Jackson is a favorite to spend more time on top. Like, Charles Rosa has been getting out-grappled, not only by Derek Minner and Bryce Mitchell, who are, I agree, levels above Damon Jackson, but like even the Justin James fight, like, he spent considerable time on bottom there, was stuck in submission attempts. And like with Damon Jackson, he's had a kind of tough matchups where we've seen him on his back, like Mirsad Bektik, super tough matchup in terms of the wrestling at 145 pounds. And then Topuria, I know that fight didn't hit the ground. I kind of throw that out. I think Topuria is just a level above either one of these guys on the feet and would probably knock out Charles Rosa in similar fashion that he did to Damon Jackson. All right, let's move on to the next fight, which we kind of foreshadowed a little bit earlier. We got Alexandr Romanov now up to a minus 800 favorite in some places, still a minus 590 on FanDuel for those of you looking to toss him in some DGen parlays this week. Just figured I'd point that out, considering they're about $2.10 off market currently. But he's facing Jared Vanderaa, who's plus 500 as the underdog, 7K flat for Vanderaa, and Romanov is 9.2K. And normally, John, I see a heavyweight with a minus 800 next to his name. I'm immediately looking to bet the other side, especially a guy like Alexandr Romanov, who I've actually faded unsuccessfully at this point twice. First time I got beat soundly with Marcos Rogerio de Lima, got forearm choked. We'll happily take the L at plus 400 on that one. But the other one was Juan Espino his last time out. And honestly, like, I think Espino would have got him. There was obviously, towards the end of the fight, Romanov, to me, looked like he was slowing down. They went to a technical decision due to a foul because he could no longer continue, allegedly. So look, I've looked to fade Alexandr Romanov. There's a minus 800 next to his name at heavyweight with 4-ounce gloves. And for whatever reason, I have zero interest in Jared Vanderaa, who actually impressed me in his performance last time out against Justin Tafa. Like, I did not think he was going to be able to go out there and soundly outstrike Justin Tafa. But when it comes down to it, I don't really know if that that matchup has any impact here, because Romanov to me is a guy who he's going to go in there. He's going to look to take you down. I don't think his striking is anything special. In fact, I think Romanov is probably going to get knocked out at some point the way he tries to close distance, but Vanderaa is super poor off his back, man. We saw it in the Sergey Spivak fight where Chris Tognoni let that fight go on entirely too long. Spivak blew up in terms of DraftKings. Like, he completely demolished a slate in terms of his ground and pound. Like, I think that Romanov is going to get Vanderaa down probably in the first round, and then it'll be up to him whether he wants to, ground and pound knockout or sink in a submission. I know you have a take in terms of how you think Romanov is most likely to win the fight, to finish the fight. So kind of curious how you see this going down, because I think we both assume like Romanov is going to get top control in the first round, likely get to a dominant position. But I know you played a prop on this fight. So talk to me about what you're on in this market.
Yeah, I have similar thoughts to you. I played Romanov by knockout at plus 180. This is just a numbers thing. Like, his inside the distance line was like minus 300 or higher. Like, his props to finish should not be that big a plus money. Like, I think his submission prop was plus 140. His knockout prop was plus 180. Like, this one just comes down to he's either going to finish with ground and pound or he's going to submit him. And typically he's been more of a submission guy. But Vandera's submission defense, like, isn't terrible. And Romanov, like, if the submission doesn't work, like, he's going to land some big ground and pound as well. And I think against a guy like Vanderaa, who's liable to just kind of cover up and shell up, like, the ref's going to hop in there at heavyweight if he starts taking like 2 or 3 of those big elbows from Romanov. So I think plus 180 is just too big of a number for a fight where it's super likely that he lands a takedown early, and it's super likely that he gets a finish early. It's just a matter of if it comes by submission or knockout, and the value is just there more for me by knockout. So I played that at plus 180. I haven't checked to see if that's still available.
It is.
But my thoughts are that it would be, just because FanDuel takes a minute. But I don't think that closes 180. So if you like the knockout prop, I think that's the way to play it. I know Bout Better in the chat said he likes the over at plus money, over 1.5. I actually don't like that. I just think Romanov, we know what he's going to do, and he's going to do it early. Like, he's going to move forward. Like you said, he probably lands a takedown within the first, like, what would you think? Like 90 seconds? Like, I don't think it's going to take him long to land a takedown. Two minutes, maybe.
I'd take the under on 90 seconds for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we at least know he's going to try within the first 2 minutes, and I don't think he's going to have he's not going to get much of a fight from Vanderaa in terms of defending the takedowns. I just think Romanov smashes here. He's probably the best play on the slate in terms of DraftKings. Like you said, going to be super chalky, but you just can't find this type of floor and ceiling combination very often. So it's just chalk that you probably have to eat and try to get different elsewhere.
Yeah, I'll put it this way. I'd rather have 100% Alexandr Romanov on DraftKings than be underweight to the field. Pepe in the chat says if Romanov doesn't get it done in the first, the tickets will be sweaty. I agree. I'm not advocating laying a minus 800 here for sure on a guy who I don't even think is very good. But just in terms of the matchup and DraftKings specifically, it just feels to me like this guy has such a ceiling that you mentioned, like it cannot be matched by anyone on the entire slate in terms of stuff we can project. Like, of course, someone could get, that KO within 60 seconds and get the win bonus plus the 25-second bonus and like have a chance to match Romanov. But there's only 10 fighters. He's the most expensive one at 9.2K. So you can still play someone who has a ton of upside alongside him. I just would prefer to get different in other spots. We spent a lot of time on the fight, but like, I really think he's going to get him out of there. We got a comment in the chat. Is the best bet under 60 seconds? It's hard to have under 60 seconds when you probably need a takedown, because like Romanov, his striking to me, of course it's heavyweight, like anyone can get knocked out by the first punch, but I think he's going to need to get a takedown and then gradually, get to mount, get to a side control, get to a crucifix in order to get the submission. So I think under 60 seconds is a tough task for him, but like under 3 minutes is probably likely. I do think there's another spot on the card where the sub 60-second prop is relatively interesting, but we'll get to that later on down the road. Let's move on to the next fight, which next fight's got people talking, man. The Twitter streets are they're chirping Jon. His boy Felipe Colares is an underdog here, plus 200 currently, $7,300 against the favorite here, Chris Gutierrez, minus 240, 8.9K. Chris Gutierrez, aka friend of the show, Luke, sparring with the reality. He looks exactly like Chris Gutierrez. And I mentioned this on Twitter. It's like Luke is going to war with Jon, because Jon is out here on the Twitter streets. I mean, the guy goes to bed and wakes up with like 100 people responding to him. People are agreeing with him. People are disagreeing. Jon, the people know that you're taking the shot here on Felipe Colares, but for those of you who didn't see the Twitter thread, which I actually thought was really informative, not only from this matchup standpoint, but just kind of to see how you break down fights in general, because everyone has a little bit different of a process. So I love the thread from you, my man. Talk to me about this fight for the people that weren't able to kind of read through your thoughts already.
Yeah, appreciate the shout out. For those that haven't seen it, check out my timeline at John Kelly DFS. Put up a tweet on Gutierrez Colares matchup. Pretty much just wanted to share my thoughts. I'm going to start doing that more too when I have like convicted takes on certain matchups each week. You know, if I have a bet or something like that, you know, I want to do something different and start doing that more on Twitter, just to get more of a conversation rather than people just saying, you know, here's my pick or here's my bet. Like I want to actually have the analysis behind it. And then, you know, we all love talking fights. So I like to hear other people's take on similar thoughts on that matchup, etc. But really my thing is like, I'm not going out there and saying like, oh, Colares is going to win. Like, no doubt about it. Like, look, Gutierrez is an excellent striker, good kickboxer, very dangerous. Nobody's denying that. Like, the dude has some of the nastiest kicks in the UFC. And if you get stuck at range with him, like if Colares just stands at range or gets backed up, like he's dead meat, no doubt about it. But at minus 240 or whatever he's at now, like I cannot justify that price tag against a guy who we know is going to look to wrestle relentlessly for 15 minutes. Like Colares is historically very durable, never been finished. He's taken stupid amounts of damage and still moved forward late in fights and wrestled guys up against the fence. He's a black belt in judo. He's a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. He's got a decent back take, more of a submission guy before entering the UFC. And then obviously since the UFC, all of his fights have gone to decision. But Gutierrez, I just think we have a pretty big sample size of him giving up takedowns, of him being controlled for extended periods on the mat, and also giving up his back when he does actually try to work back to his feet. And those are some serious red flags for a guy that's minus 240. Like, obviously, like I said, if the fight plays out striking, like he's going to look like a big favorite here. I just don't think it does. And we have a history of a guy who is going to relentlessly push him up against the cage and look to wrestle. And I think have success in doing that. Like Gutierrez, obviously the Barcelos fight, like Barcelos is levels better grappling than Colares, like no doubt about it. But the takedowns came super easy. And I think Colares can land takedowns here. We saw Gutierrez against De Frides, who Colares also fought. Like De Frides didn't have any trouble taking him down multiple times, ended up losing a split decision basically on the optics of getting his leg kicked off. And that's the concern, is like you can't stay striking with Gutierrez very long because he's going to kick those legs. And Colares does have a wide stance. Like the leg kicks are going to be there all day. It's just that I don't expect him to stand there and get his leg kicked off without moving forward and wrestling. And then moving on, Gutierrez against Cody Durden. Durden got him down in the first round, and Durden, former high school state wrestling champion. So he's decent wrestler as well, but ended up getting a trip takedown within the first 30 seconds, controlled him the entire first round, scored a 10-8. Like Gutierrez does not work back to his feet. And once he's in compromising positions, he really just kind of gives up until the end of the round. And I think that's something that's kind of not really talked about, because a few of those times it just happened to come towards the end of the round to where he's on his back for the rest of the round, or he's being controlled for the rest of the round. But that's not in the box score because the control time might not be as high, but he didn't work back to his feet. Like if that takedown came earlier in the round, it would have been likely for the rest of the round, because we saw in multiple fights now where he's taken down in the beginning of a round, he doesn't work back to his feet literally until the end of the round. So just a lot of concerning things. Even Andre Ewell was able to catch a kick and take him down. There's so many ways that Colares could land takedowns here, and I think he does. And if he doesn't, whatever, like I'll take my L. This isn't the first time I've been kind of on an island, and it definitely won't be the last. all I'm doing is just laying the case for why this guy, you shouldn't be betting this guy at minus 240, because we have just a stylistic matchup to where I have concerns about him. And I think Colares could execute the right game plan and has the right tools to execute that game plan and have some success. So I played Colares on the money line plus 210 for 1.5 units. And I played Colares by submission for 0.5 unit at plus 800, because if I think he does have success wrestling and getting him down, then Gutierrez has a history of giving up his back. And I think if he does that here, he probably gets choked out. So like I said, I mean, if he ends up striking and gets his leg kicked off, cool, I look like an idiot. I'm sure there's going to be 100 people waiting to go back to my thread and be like, haha, you said Colares would win. Like, that's totally fine. But I'm, again, just advocating for the red flags on Gutierrez and why I think Colares is a live underdog here. So I'm okay with taking the shot on the underdog.
Yeah, I came into the week and I kind of thought this fight was priced somewhat accurately. I hadn't done a ton of thinking about it. Like, I think that Chris Gutierrez should probably kick his ass, like, bad at range, really kick his leg. Like, Chris Gutierrez is a specialist at a really, useful skill in terms of leg kicks, but, like, there aren't really guys out there who, like, specialize in leg kicks. Of course, there's some really good fighters that utilize them in their game a ton. Leston Gaethje comes to mind. But Chris Gutierrez, like, his real skill is kicking the leg, you know what I mean? And so I figure that he's gonna be able to do that kind of that range against Colares. And with Colares, I was thinking, like, yeah, it's plus 250. He's probably gonna get his ass whooped, but he also moves forward, kind of like a zombie, tough guy to put away. We've seen him kind of drag fights into deep waters before against a guy like Luke Sanders and come away with a victory in that fight, regardless of how you scored it. Like, he was getting beat up and then was able to, land takedowns, drag the fight into deep water. So I don't really tail people in MMA. Like, obviously I do content. I spend a lot of time looking at the card, but you definitely have got me thinking about placing a Felipe Colares a bet this weekend. Not a spot that I bet yet, but I won't spend too much time talking because I think you made the case for it. I would not bet Chris Gutierrez. There's no world. I'm just never betting him as minus 240. Like, the guy throws way too many calf kicks in a matchup like this for one, like, to not get caught. Like you mentioned, the Andre Ewell fight, just last thing on this matchup is, like, Ewell caught his kick and was able to kind of throw him down. I will say that Gutierrez worked back up to his feet in that fight. Like, he was only controlled for like less than 10 seconds in that fight, but caught kicks can be weird because sometimes you land in guard and then it's like an actual takedown. And sometimes it's just like, 5 points on DraftKings, but you're really just tossing someone for them to get up. I expect Colares to shoot, if this fight goes 15 minutes, like, he's going to shoot more than 5 takedowns kind of as a floor, I would think. So you're getting that at plus 200 against a guy with a history of struggling a little bit against that type of style. So I don't think Gutierrez is like the worst grappler in the world, but I certainly think he's at a grappling disadvantage in this spot. So I think your shot is at the very least, it's well reasoned, and I might be joining you on that island this weekend at plus 200 if there's still room.
And the last thing I'll add, you said, like, we know he'll shoot at least 5 takedowns or whatever. Like, he's attempted at least 8 or more takedowns in every UFC fight. He's never gone a UFC fight without landing at least 1 takedown. So it's not like we don't have a history of him at least trying for it. This isn't one of those matchups where it's like, oh, if we think he wrestles, like, we know he's at least going to try to wrestle. And that's something that I think I left out that I wanted to put out there, because it's not like if he just stands there and strikes, it would go against everything that we've seen from him previously. So I think that's another data point that you'd have to consider, but just wanted to add that as well before we move on.
Right. You can only work with the data points you're given. And, like, Gutierrez isn't just going to fall down from the first takedown attempt. He has a 73% takedown defense, but it's more so like repeated takedown attempts is more so your point. Like, the guy's going to shoot more than likely 5 is a big favorite. You're putting the number at 8 in every fight that he's had so far. Like, he's going to shoot takedowns in bulk. So even a guy with 75% takedown defense against an average wrestler, you don't want to get too mathy here because there's a lot of variables. Like, he's faced really good wrestlers like Barcelos, and he's faced, kind of poor wrestlers like a Ryan McDonald that he's defended takedowns from. That's Gutierrez I'm talking about. But just, you would think that if Colares shoots 8 takedowns here, more than likely he lands on top once, maybe twice, could be 3 times. And those could be rounds because we've seen Gutierrez get stuck on his back.
Yeah, and I know I said I'd stop talking, but the last thing is his first level takedown defense, his takedown defense at range is very good. It's when he gets backed up against the fence specifically where it goes down dramatically. If you go back and watch all his fights, a lot of his takedowns come after he's already pressured against the fence. He doesn't know how to defend takedowns against the fence. So even though it might be 73%, it gets much, much worse when he's backed up against the fence. And that's what I expect Colares to do. But I'll stop talking now. That's why I bet Colares. Do you, though? If you don't want to, then don't do it. But please don't lay juice on Gutierrez at -240.
Crowd the kicker, as they say. You knew the Undisputed show wasn't going to go less than an hour. It could be 10 fights, all Contender Series level, and there had to be a way we can go out over an hour. But in all seriousness, that's the good stuff right there. That's why the people watch. That's why I listen to what you say, and hopefully why other people listen to what you say, because they'll make money long-term doing so. Let's move on to the main card here for UFC Vegas 39. We got Phil Hawes as a -315 favorite, $9,000 flat on DraftKings against Deron. Winn comes back here as an underdog, plus 265 for Deron currently. He's 7.2K flat on DraftKings. And I'll let you rest the vocal cords there for a minute, John, because I'll plant my underdog flag of the week here on Deron Winn. I have not bet him yet. I'm going to bet him. I'm pretty convinced of that. I think that at plus 265, there's kind of no way that I would be able to not bet this number. I just think there's a ton of value. With Phil Hawes, this is a guy who I faded actually in his last time out against Kyle Dawkins, and I was impressed. I think it was by far the best performance that he's put up in the UFC to date. Knocked out Jacob Malkoun in under a minute, which is impressive in terms of Phil Hawes is an absolute specimen of a man and hits extremely hard and is a good striker and good wrestler for about 5 minutes against literally anyone in the world. We talk about people who would be the champion if fights were 1 round. Phil Hawes is a top 5 guy, maybe pound for pound if fights go 5 minutes. But the reality is if he can't get a guy out of there in 5 minutes, he's really struggled. But in his last 2 fights, they did go the entire 15 minutes. He is 2-0. But I think it's kind of important to kind of dive deep into those matchups, see what we're working with. The Imavov fight, he started off extremely well there, but really slowed down. That was a fight where there were multiple warnings that they were going to get broken up against the fence. Phil Hawes was clinging on for dear life in order to just have control in that fight. And it got sketchy towards the end of it. In terms of he was landing no type of damage. He was getting hit. Phil Hawes is a guy who historically he's only been knocked out 1 time, and it was that brutal head kick by Julian Marquez, who fights next week. And that was on Contender Series 3 or 4 years ago at this point. He hasn't lost since. But Phil Hawes is a guy who we've seen get hurt on multiple occasions. His chin is not great. I will say one thing that a buddy, friend of the show, John, I know you were on with him talking about Contender Series last week, Narco Cop. I was listening to him talk earlier today, and he mentioned, usually I don't listen to any content kind of before we do our show, but I already know I'm betting Deron Winn, so I was just curious what other people were thinking of the spot. And something he mentioned as a pro for Phil Hawes, which I thought was interesting, is when Hawes gets hurt, he's very good at instinctively wrestling. That is something that his fight IQ is extremely hard in that regard. Where I think he's going to run into trouble in this match against Deron Winn is Deron Winn is borderline Olympic level wrestler. I don't think Phil Hawes is going to get him down. Phil Hawes is a way bigger man. He has a reach advantage of 7 inches in this spot. He's going to be a half foot taller than Deron Winn. The weigh-ins on Friday are going to be absolutely hysterical. Phil Hawes is going to tower above Deron Winn. But in terms of wrestling, sometimes that doesn't matter. On one hand, it's exhausting to wrestle a guy like Phil Hawes. He's super strong. But on the other hand, Deron Winn, very low base, right? His center of gravity. He's not an easy guy to take down. I don't think that Hawes is going to be able to take him down. That might be a hot take this week. But I think Hawes is going to try to keep it striking. And when he does, I think he's a better striker than Deron Winn. Do not get me wrong. I think that there's a good chance that he knocks out Deron Winn kind of in the first round of this matchup. However, if the fight gets dragged into deeper waters, I think Deron Winn could land takedowns of his own. This is a guy who, you mentioned Colares at the very least is going to attempt 8 takedowns because he does that in every fight. With Deron Winn, it's not as reliable a sample, but he is consistently going out there and doing things. The fight against Jaron Mearshart is kind of the only outlier, but UFC debut against Eric Spicely threw 170 strikes. I think everyone, including DC, who, he's his teammate, Deron Winn, wrestling coach over at Gilroy High School, DC was surprised that he wasn't wrestling in the commentary booth for that fight, but he went out there and threw 170 significant strikes. That works too in terms of winning minutes. And then obviously his last fight out against Antonio Hoyo, he landed 12 takedowns in that fight. And the top control time was not great. He's not fantastic on top, mostly because he's undersized, but I don't know, man. I think he's going to move forward. I think he has a good chance to win minutes. And the thing that I think is really interesting in this fight, and John, I kind of want to get your opinion on it after I finish up here in a second, is both of these guys we've seen slow down in the past. Phil Hawes especially. But I think there's a real difference that we need to consider in terms of their gas tanks, where I've heard a lot of people kind of oversimplified, in my opinion, saying both these guys slow down. It's going to be really difficult. It could get sloppy down the stretch. To me, Deron Winn is a guy who gasses himself out by just putting up so much output, right? Like shooting 12 takedowns, landing 12 takedowns is extremely taxing. That will make anyone tired, but he's a lifelong wrestler. He's kind of been able to always push through that kind of cardio wall he's had. And Phil Hawes is a legitimate wrestler too. I'm sure you'll touch on that in your breakdown of the fight, John. But to me, Phil Hawes gets tired by other people pressuring him, right? Like if you try to take Phil Hawes down, you engage with him in the clinch for long periods of time. That's what slows him down, where Deron Winn is kind of his own worst enemy. But he's really not, because the things he's doing that slow himself down is ultimately what's going to win him fights, considering he's undersized. He isn't that good of a striker. Like he needs to do things to win the fight, if that makes sense. So I think that Deron Winn is going to be pushing a pace here that will tire himself out, but it's way more tiring to be the one moving backwards, defending takedowns over and over again, getting pushed against the fence. So to me, I think Deron Winn is worth a shot at plus 265. I completely understand Phil Hawes being the favorite here. Better athlete, better striker, hits harder, has an accomplished wrestling background himself. I just think that if he doesn't get this fight over real early, that Deron Winn is kind of going to be able to bring up those old issues we've seen with Phil Hawes in terms of the cardio and maybe even the durability down the stretch. So I'll pick Phil Hawes. Obviously, he's minus 315. If I wasn't picking him, I would have to be like max betting Deron Winn. But I'll have a wager on Deron Winn. I think a plus 265 is certainly worth a stab. But I talked for entirely way too long there, John. Wanted to give you a rest after you went to war for Felipe Colares. Tell me what you're thinking here for Deron Winn. Am I crazy, or is there value kind of on the underdog here at a big price?
No, I think that was a really good breakdown. I'm gonna make a few points, but what's Hawes by knockout number, or Hawes by knockout in round one? If you're able to pull that up while I'm
I have it.
Here.
Hawes by KO 1. I think I'll double check right now. It should be plus 380 on FanDuel.
Okay.
And I think you could do worse than that. Like if you want to bet Phil Hawes, I'd rather bet him like that than money line.
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna say, is like maybe you go, if you're interested in the way this kind of plays out, or the way you think it plays out, is maybe Hawes plus 380, KO 1, and Winn plus 265 money line. Like that covers a lot of outcomes here, and you're getting, I mean, pretty decent numbers on both sides. So that's a different way that you could arb the fight a little bit, or even Hawes by knockout, but that number might not be good enough. It's probably like plus 150 or something. I think like something like that, maybe even shorter.
Yep. No, on the money.
Yeah. So, but I agree. I mean, I get the underdog shot on Deron Winn here. That was the point I was going to make in terms of the cardio, is like, yes, he does slow down, but typically he slows down late in the second round or even the third round. And like you said, it's because of after exerting himself, putting out so much output and constantly trying to wrestle. Whereas Hawes, it's like he pretty much gasses out immediately after the first round, regardless if he's being pressured or not. Like, the thing is like when you see two guys that both have a wrestling background, you mentioned Deron Winn, what was he, like a former, or he tried to go to the Olympics, but he, I don't think he made it.
He didn't make the Olympics, but like he's but
he's right there. Yeah.
He's accomplished in wrestling. Like,
I
think he fought at like Pan American Games in, I mean, I guess it's a long time ago now, but like he's definitely like competed like for the U.S. national team, like to a level where Phil Hawes has not, and Phil Hawes didn't even like go D1 or anything like that. Not to say he's not a good MMA wrestler, just back to your point though.
Yeah, and that's basically what I was getting at, is Deron Winn, even though he may not have made the Olympics or whatever, like he's right up there as an Olympic level style of wrestler. Hawes, wrestled Division II, or junior college.
I think it was junior college,
and then I think he went D2 after that. I could be wrong, but either way, obviously Winn is the better technical wrestler, but I do have concerns that if Winn can't get Hawes down to the ground early, because we've seen it when both guys have good wrestling, like Usman Covington, it turns into a striking match, and if that's what happens here, then I think Winn probably gets knocked out here at a pretty high clip. And we know Hawes is going to be most dangerous in round one. So even though I get the case for Deron Winn, I'm not betting him. I think he probably gets knocked out here. Gun to my head, I'd probably rather play Hawes by knockout in round 1, but I totally understand the thesis behind Deron Winn. You know, you're basically expecting him to at least try to wrestle here and maybe have some success in round 1. And then as Hawes gets tired, you know, those takedowns are going to come easier for Deron Winn. And maybe he wins, you know, a lot of minutes in the second and third round if the fight does get extended. So totally okay with that. And in terms of DraftKings, I think both guys have a really big ceiling here, just because Hawes has a lot of finishing potential in round 1. Maybe he can wrestle. But like you, I think maybe the takedowns are probably more likely to come on the Deron Winn side. So if he does pull off the upset, we know his path to victory involves multiple takedowns, some control time as well. But yeah, I mean, I think you shouldn't be laying juice on Phil Hawes. I think if you are going to bet him, like Bout Better says, he minus 300 and climbing. If you are going to bet him, it's got to be the knockout prop. But I prefer the knockout in round 1, or just go with Jonah and take the big odds underdog shot on Deron Winn.
We might get plus 300 on Deron Winn at this point, the way the line is moving. And then add in the weigh-ins look tomorrow, where one's going to be like 2 times the size of the other. Real quick before we move on, doesn't change my outlook on the fight at all, but I just want to correct both of us. So Hawes went to junior college, was a national champ there, then went to Iowa State. So like he did wrestle D1 and Big 12. So just, I don't know, correct it, facts, get the facts right here. But regardless, like I'm planting my flag. Right? He's not taking Deron Winn down. I don't even think he's really going to try to take Deron Winn down, to be completely honest. But even if he did, like I think it would just gas him out. So I hope Phil Hawes does as hard as he can. And if he knocks him out in round 1, then I'll lose my bet. And if not, I think Deron Winn looks a lot closer to a coin flip than he does a plus 300 underdog potentially. All right, let's move on to our second fight of the main card here. We got Sabina Mazo minus 180 against Mariya. Agapova comes back plus 155 for Agapova. DK prices here: Mazo 8.3K, Agapova $7,900. And we spent a lot of time on the last 2 fights, which I think is great because we each have strong takes on them. This is not a fight where I have a strong take. Like with Agapova, she's coming off pretty much the biggest upset loss, according to the odds, in UFC history. And then in terms of Sabina Mazo, like she's not someone who I've ever really been high on. Like she's a decent range kickboxer. She hasn't fought anyone super good in terms of taking her down. And when she has, like Alexis Davis spent on time on top, Morose spent time on top against her. Like it's just one of those things with Mazo where she's like a long rangey kickboxer at 125 pounds in women's MMA who has been taken down in like almost all of her fights. Like to me, it's just a tough fight to handicap, mostly because I don't know what's even going on with Agapova. Like, do we put credit into like what the market thought of her originally before Dobson? Like, do we say, oh, hey, look, this woman was one time the biggest favorite in UFC history? Or do we just say like that was completely wrong and she gassed out in that fight? And then there's all the stuff outside the cage where her former teammates are like accusing her of doing all these things. She can't seem to stay at a gym. On the other end, like Sabina Mazo was at King's MMA for a minute. I don't think she trained there this camp. Like there's just a lot of unknowns for me here. And I would just love nothing more than to sit back and have $0 invested in it. So complete pass for me in Mazo versus Agapova. Jon, any bets for you here?
No, I'm kind of with you. Like I think Agapova's live here. No, like I'm not doubting that. It's just I really don't have any interest in betting her with a lot of the stuff going on outside the octagon. Mazo, I mean, she's high volume kickboxer, probably going to land more here, probably going to do more damage with the leg kicks. But I think Agapova could wrestle her if she wanted to. We've seen Mazo. That's how Alexis Davis beat her, took her down 3 times, controlled her on the mat. Like, I think that's within the cards here. But I'm with you. Like, there's a lot of questions on both sides. Bout Better says no simping. Come on, dude. Like it's no longer September. Like we're over no simp September, but these aren't, I have my few fighters. Tabitha Ritchie's got a fight coming up here in a couple weeks. I know Jonah might fight me on that one, but these aren't one of them. But yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think there's just better fights to target. Like maybe if you take that shot on Agapova as an underdog, I don't hate that. I think in terms of DraftKings, if she wrestles, she's got a higher ceiling. But yeah, I know it's kind of crazy. I'm usually betting all the low level women's MMA matchups, but not this one. I don't have a strong take. I think Mazo line's probably a little bit wide, but no interest in betting either side.
Yeah, I mean, Tabitha Ricci didn't respond to my DM on Instagram wishing her good luck, so I may be out of luck there. We'll save the simping for next week. Main event, Aspen Ladd versus Norma Dumont. Let's move on to the featured bout of the night here. We got the flyweights. With really fun fight here. Matheus Nicolau minus 200 against Tim Elliott plus 170. For Tim Elliott, we got Nicolau 8.5K on DraftKings and Tim Elliott is 7.7K. And for me, I don't think there's really any value on the money line either way. I have listened to people who I trust, DMing me, try to talk to actually both sides here. I think this is pretty split down the middle. But to me, what stands out most about this fight, and you kind of mentioned it earlier in terms of the Damon Jackson versus Charles Rosa fight, you said that one could potentially turn into like this fight with all this grappling and DraftKings points left and right. I think this is a fight that I feel really solidly will turn into a fight that features a lot of scrambling. We know what Tim Elliott brings to the table. Like Tim Elliott might be the best 17-11 fighter of all time. Like he's been in there against Demetrius Johnson, like against Figueiredo, Askarov, Royval. Like this is a guy who has fought the best of the best. And let's be fair, like he's been in there with the best of the best, but he hasn't really beaten any of them, right? Like his wins recently. Let me pull this up. Is Jordan Espinoza, Ryan Benoit, Mark De La Rosa. I think none of those three are in the UFC. Before that, Luis Smolka, who like is a middling flyweight, like it is what it is. But basically, Tim Elliott falls short against the elite of the division and beats up other people who don't. And we know what his style is. Like this guy lands over 4 takedowns per 15 minutes. He runs around like a chicken with his head cut off. He's going to throw complete disregard to any sort of defense. He's going to throw winging hooks because he's not scared of getting taken down himself. And then he's going to close the distance and try to take you down. And with Matheus Nicolau, like I think we have the more well-rounded fighter in this spot. I expect him to win the striking pretty handedly. I think he's a way better technical striker. I would not be surprised if he hurt Tim Elliott bad on the feet. Like, let's not forget, less than 2 years ago, we were talking about how Askarov like really hurt Tim Elliott on the feet. And it looked like he was out on his feet and he didn't remember the third round. And this is a guy who's taken a lot of damage, a lot of mileage over the years. I successfully faded him his next time out with Brandon Royval and Royval's UFC debut, but Tim's looked good in his last 2 fights. But like I mentioned, I think it just kind of comes down to the strength of schedule when we talk about Tim Elliott. He's a guy who, when he's the hammer, he does extremely well. And when he's the nail, he does not do as well. I lean that he's going to be more so the nail in this spot. I think Nicolau kind of has him covered everywhere, but I do think Elliott can land takedowns. And can he win the fight like that? Sure. Like I'm not laying minus 200 with Nicolau, who might spend a lot of time on his back here. But at the same time, like the thing with Elliott, I know he's working with James Krause. Just to me, he pushes himself at such a pace that he passes himself out, similar to the way Deron Winn does. But he's never really able to keep the grind going. Like the Royval fight got submitted. Like I would not be surprised. And I guess my official prediction is like, I think it's a competitive fight for a bit. Nicolau either starches him on the feet or finishes with some sort of front headlock choke. Good Darce choke. I think he has a guillotine on his record as well. So I think that it's a competitive fight for as long as it lasts. My main takeaway is I need to have a lot of this fight on DraftKings. So I think the winner is almost a lock to be optimal on a 10-fight slate where 6 of the winners are most likely to be optimal. So I'll pick Nicolau inside the distance, but definitely a fight to target on DK. John, featured bout of the night. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think that was a good breakdown. Another one. I don't have a ton to add here. Elliott's always got the type of upside to break the slate on DraftKings. We've seen it multiple times. Like that's why I always like targeting him, even as a big underdog here. The issue is Nicolau is super well-rounded. Like you said, he might just have Elliott covered everywhere. And while the fight plays out striking, like I just don't trust the durability of Tim Elliott. Like he's only been knocked out once. But now pretty much in his last, 4 or 5 fights, we've seen him wobbled, stunned, even out on his feet in the Ben 10 fight. He fought somebody else, didn't remember the entire first round. Askarov fight. Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, there's definitely concerns with Tim Elliott. Also, great wrestler, but always sticks his neck out there, puts himself in some compromising positions on the mat. And he's just overconfident in his grappling. And that's why he's been submitted so many times, is because he just is like, well, I'm a better grappler than everybody. So I'm just going to put myself in these bad spots and work my way out of it. And then all of a sudden, oh, whoops, he doesn't work his way out of it and he gets submitted. So against Nicolau, who's super well-rounded, like I said, probably the better technical striker here. Probably, I think, the better submission grappler as well. I'm always going to target Elliott for the upside on DraftKings, but like you said, I think Nicolau probably hasn't covered. If you're going to target this one, I think what's the over 2.5 on this? Is it juiced?
Let me pull that up right now. Over 2.5 minus 225.
Okay, so never mind. So maybe just look at a prop on either side. Like I think somebody said Nicolau submission. Don't hate that depending on the number. But yeah, no action for me. It's just going to be one in terms of DraftKings. Like you said, I think it scores well. I think you should probably get exposure to both sides.
I'd rather have the under than the over at that pricing, plus 185. Yeah, but I think a lot of the finishing upside comes from Nicolau, and I think a lot of Elliott's win condition comes from kind of piling up time on top. One hot take I'll say before we move on to the co-main, maybe I'll just keep this on the show for only special people who are listening to the show can hear this. We won't talk about it anywhere else in my articles this week. I don't know how much I'll play it, but normally when I make 150 lineups on DK, like I just check off the rule on pretty much any optimizer or lineup building place you'll find where like you don't stack a fight, right? Like I don't even stack main events. I'll put it out there with only 10 fights this weekend. If, and I'm not saying there will be, if we get to the spot where there's like no underdogs that win, and it turns out that someone who stacks a fight could win, or a loser gets in the optimal winning lineup, I think Tim Elliott has a good chance to lose this fight and could still be on a GPP winning lineup. I will likely have fights or have teams out of my 150 if I end up playing 150 this weekend where I stack this fight. It just feels like it's such a short slate. There's not a ton of upside towards the bottom that I think that this fight could just kind of go nuclear to the extent that the loser would outscore some other winners on this slate. So there's the hot take of the week. I don't think I've ever called that on the pod before, but and I never play it, but there's the hot take of the week from me outside of the Deron Winn plus 300 shot. I guess we're just full of hot takes here. Got to keep the people involved here as we have a Jared Gooden co-main event coming up. So let's talk about that co-main event here. We got Randy Brown minus 240 against Jared Gooden, as I mentioned, plus 205 here as the underdog. Brown's 8.8K on DraftKings. Gooden is 7.4K. John, I'll let you go first here. I have no real strong opinion. I'm picking Brown to win, but I'm kind of curious their thoughts here because you were trying to talk me into a prop earlier today, and I'm curious kind of the reasoning behind it and what your play is here for the people.
Yeah, I think people always assume like I'm trying to convince them to bet what I'm betting. I'm definitely not. I just like to share my opinion about it and like to hear other people's. Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying in general, like because of the Twitter thread and everything, like somebody commented and was like, why are you telling people what to bet? Like, dude, I don't care what you bet. Like, I'm just sharing my ideas. And one of my ideas here happens to be Jared Gooden by knockout at plus 460. I think that's still available on FanDuel. Again, FanDuel, I love their props. They're usually off market by a little bit. And this is one of those times, like everywhere else open like plus 400, they open up plus 460. And that's just, I think too big of a number. Like what's that? Less than 18% implied probability for Jared Gooden to win by knockout when this is a stylistic matchup where I think both guys are going to stand and trade until somebody gets hurt on the feet and gets knocked out. Like, and I know Brown has had a couple submission wins lately. Like Jared Gooden's pretty good defensive grappler. I believe he's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but he's a guy who I think just has power. We know he's sort of like Nico Price in a sense where he's going to throw a ton of volume. He's going to look to land a big shot, even though he's probably going to eat more shots. Like he's the type that'll eat 2 shots to give you 1 shot. And going up against another striker like Randy Brown, whose durability is also kind of suspect. We've seen him knocked out. We've seen him hurt to the body. I just think Gooden's a powerful guy, and his path to victory is probably a knockout win. And I think it comes at a higher clip than plus 460. So I took the knockout shot on Jared Gooden for a unit. I think if you're going to target this fight, that's the way to do it. I don't really trust Randy Brown to look minus 235 here either. So I'm okay with the underdog look on Jared Gooden.
Yeah, I don't hate the prop at plus 460. I think you said you got on FanDuel.
Yeah.
To me, like Jared Gooden just all around is not that good of a fighter. And a lot of his win equity comes by knockout, which obviously you're capturing in your prop play. But to me, like this is a guy who Nicholas Stolze is someone who's not very good. And Jared Gooden, I should say. Damn it, I'm the first one to mess that up. I could have sworn that you would be.
It's usually me.
No. Yeah, I would have laid good money that you would be the first one to do this, especially with them going back-to-back weeks. But Jared Gooden, like plus 150 dog last time out to go 0-3 in the UFC. He needed to get the win to avoid going 0-3. I completely messed up how I wanted to say that. But like, he's fighting a pretty mid-level of competition and was favored to be 0-3 in the UFC. And like with Randy Brown, man, I understand that there's some concerns with the durability. He falls apart in some fights, but like this is a guy, man, his loss, like Vicente Luque, Nico Price, Bilal Muhammad recently, beaten Brian Barberena before it looked like Barberena was kind of on his way out, submitted Warley Alves, beat Alex Oliveira, Mickey Gall. Like, these are guys who aren't great wins, but they're a lot better than the guys that Jared Gooden has fought. You know, Alan Jobain, a solid fighter, but was literally retiring after that fight. And Nurmagomedov, I mean, it was more so the way he lost to Nurmagomedov. Like, I don't think a lot of people expected him to get his face jabbed off in that spot, and it was just bad optics. So I think Brown has him covered everywhere. Historically, the way you beat Randy Brown is to just kind of spam calf kicks. Doesn't check those, has struggled with those historically, but I don't know. I don't really trust Gooden to go in there and do it. I think Brown is the better grappler, should have hit the floor. I'd rather bet Randy Brown minus 235 on the money line than the KO prop personally on the other side, but maybe I'm just a juice boy. I won't be getting involved. Nothing for me in the co-main event. Anything to add here, John, or should we move on to the main event?
No, we can move on to the main.
Okay, sweet. All right, so in our main event this weekend, we got a pretty good stylistic matchup here, a stylistic clash, pretty binary fight, meaning I think if there's takedowns landed, I favor Mackenzie Dern here, who's the minus 175 favorite, and if the fight stays on the feet, I would favor Marina Rodriguez, who's plus 150 here as the underdog. Two Brazilians in the strawweight rankings who probably close to a title shot with a win here, maybe one win away after this fight. But I'm kind of curious your take here, John, because it seems like the public consensus, and I think the public consensus is more likely right than not in this spot, is that if this fight stays standing, Marina Rodriguez is going to win relatively handily against Mackenzie Dern. But if the fight hits the ground, Mackenzie Dern, I faded her a bunch in the past, but we got to give her credit. Like, she's probably the best pure BJJ women's MMA fighter that we've ever seen at this level. Like, I mentioned, like, if there's takedowns landed, we would favor Mackenzie Dern. Man, if Marina Rodriguez slips or falls down, she's in big trouble in this fight. So I think Dern is a deserved favorite at minus 175. I did make a play on the fight, but curious your take here if you bet anything on the fight, and then I'll go into my breakdown.
I thought I could be wrong. Did you bet Dern by submission plus 150 or no?
Yeah, I bet Dern. Yeah.
Okay, I thought you just said right there that you didn't have action for some reason.
No,
but maybe I misheard you.
I do have action, but I wasn't gonna say it yet. But I can just give a breakdown quickly if you want me to go first. That's fine.
No. I bet the same thing. I just bet it at a worse number. Go figure. Jonah bet. I think plus 150 was the number you got. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I missed that number, which is a running trend here. That's why I make that joke where Jonah bets something at a better number than me when we end up on the same place. But I basically went back and looked into it, and I still found value at plus 110. Like, basically, I think Dern gets a submission here at a pretty decent clip. And I think it's for sure over 50%. So any plus money on Dern by submission, I think was very good, especially if you got the plus 150. I think that's very good. Like, I think Marina Rodriguez, no doubt she has the striking advantage. She's also another fighter who, even more so than Chris Gutierrez, who we talked about earlier, has struggled to defend takedowns. And when she gets taken down, she can be controlled. She can be advanced. Like, a lot of those matchups, like, she's fought Carla Esparza, who wasn't really looking to submit her, just sort of wanted to lay and pray, spend time in top position. Who is another one? She drew against Rana Marcos, right?
Like, she's actually fought decent. Like, when I went back and taped her here, she's fought a better, not even a better strength of schedule, but like a strength of schedule that I would have expected her to do worse on now that we know her skill set. Like, she fought Rana Marcos. That was the first draw where she got 10-8'd. She beat Tisha Torres, who, I mean, the way Tisha Torres is looking now, I think that's a pretty impressive result for Rodriguez. And then she drew with Calvillo and lost to Esparza, and then knocked out Heba. So those are kind of the 5 grapplers she's faced to this point.
Yep. And to your point, almost all of them had wrestling success. Like, Amanda Hebos didn't really, she just got stuck striking too long and paid the price. She's also low key a little bit chinny. We'll talk about her in a few weeks. She's got a fight coming up at Fight Island where I actually like her quite a bit. Early look on Amanda Hebos minus 136 on FanDuel against Verna Jandiroba. Yeah, I know you're a Jandiroba guy, but I feel pretty strongly about Amanda Hebos. So yeah, we'll definitely get into that in a couple weeks. But my point is, all of those people that have some sort of wrestling or grappling base, they've had success against Marina Rodriguez. And to your point, it's probably only going to take one takedown, I think, for Dern to get the job done here. And she has 5 rounds to force some sort of grappling exchange. Like, I just think she does it. Like, I've also historically been a Dern backer. So like, this isn't news for anybody. If she's facing somebody that can't defend submissions or that can't defend takedowns, like, I'm almost always going to pick her. I think she gets the job done here. Really the only way I think Rodriguez can win is if she lands something really big early on in the fight, or maybe Dern like gasses out and can't take her down. But I think those are probably both pretty low outcomes. So I played Dern by submission at plus 110. I think she gets the job done here. I'd rather back her by submission than on the money line, or just in props in general. Like, if you don't like submission, I think by points is probably a hot take, but I think that's fine too. If we think she's successful with the wrestling, but yeah, I like Dern by submission here in our main event.
Yeah, so I agree in some regards, and I know I gave my play out here. I kind of disagree in the fact that, like, I don't think that Rodriguez's path to victory is narrow. I would actually argue that Dern has a super narrow path to victory here, because I think she's going to get pieced up on the feet pretty bad. And honestly, like, I know I've been wrong time and time again on Mackenzie Dern, and I'm trying to give her like the respect she deserves, because she is so lethal in that one aspect of the game. And props to her. She got the takedown against Nina Ansaroff her last time out, or Nina Nunes now. But like, I don't know, man. Like, her wrestling to me is still not impressive, to the point where, like, I think she's gonna lose until she gets the submission. The thing is, she has 25 minutes, like you mentioned, and I don't even think she needs to hit a takedown, like a caught kick of some regard. She might even pull guard, like,
roll.
I mean, we've seen her like end up in all these bizarre positions. We've seen, like, don't get me started on the Reina Marcos and Hannah Cyphers. Like, Dern, her stand-up is improving. Sure, I will say that. I'm not ready to say that like she has the wrestling to get the fight to the floor consistently against the top level fighters. I do think her stand-up is improving. Like, I think if you ran back the Ashley Yoder fight from 2018, like, she's not getting knocked down if they rematch this time. Like, I do think Dern's hands have improved a lot, but I'm still not set on her wrestling, and her hands could have improved 3 times what they were against Yoder. She's still at a massive striking disadvantage here. So on the money line, honestly, I think the value is on Rodriguez. But with the sub prop, I feel like the sub prop for Dern might as well be her money line. Like, I know she's won decisions within the UFC. I just don't think this is a spot where she can win a decision, because if she gets the fight to the ground, she's going to submit Marina Rodriguez. Like, I think first time the fight hits the ground, man, it might be like over 70% that she gets a sub the first time they hit the ground, assuming that there's time left in the round. Like, she's just so methodical in getting to positions where she's able to pull off a submission, that I think that is why I'm betting Dern, because I think her path is narrow, but it's so likely if she can get to that path that she's able to finish the fight right then and there. You know what I mean? So like, I think Marina Rodriguez, I think she wins like decision. Man, I don't think Dern can really win a decision here, because if she gets the fight to the floor, she's going to win right then and there. And if she doesn't get the fight to the floor, I wouldn't be surprised if she got knocked out, or more likely like a 50-45 scenario. And Mackenzie Dern is someone we've talked about her cardio in the past a little bit. We talked about Amanda Hebos. When she fought Hebos, the cardio was a concern. This will be her first 5-round fight, I believe. Certainly in the UFC. I don't think she had one prior to the UFC. So it'll be interesting what this fight looks like in round 4, but ultimately, I think Dern gets her down in the first 10 minutes and finishes the fight not soon thereafter. So there's my take on the main event. I bet Dern by sub plus 150. Plus 100, I think, is closer to accurate. I'm not sure I would bet it at current market, but I think you could do worse in this fight. But I'll toss it back over to you, John. That is 10 fights for UFC Vegas 39. We didn't get under an hour like we had hoped for, like we were shooting for, but I think we had some good discourse, some big underdogs, good talk on the main event. If you have anything to add about really the entire card as a whole, go for it. And if not, feel free to take us out of here, my man.
Yeah, I was just going to make that one last point. Was I basically just meant, if you're targeting Dern, I'd look at a prop rather than the money line. I think we both like submission there. And really that was the thing with the Nina Ansaroff fight, was like, well, Nina has really good takedown defense. She's going to keep it striking where she has a striking advantage. Well, that's what Marina Rodriguez needs to do as well. And Marina Rodriguez doesn't even have as good a takedown defense. Like, she's always struggled to defend takedowns. And we saw Mackenzie Dern just go out there right away and land a takedown against Nina. Like, I think it's not a hot take whatsoever to expect her to land takedowns here and have that success early, even though her wrestling may not be that good. It has been improving. I think she takes her down. I think she subs her. I don't even hate going submission by round 1,
Low key,
depending
I like
on what
that
number
too.
you can find there. But yeah, we did it. 10 fights, like you said. Fun slate, even though it's maybe not the highest level, but I think there's definitely a couple spots that we laid out where there are some opportunities to make some money this week. As always, you can find the rest of our content at ftndaily.com, ftnbets.com, all completely free. Do us a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you're listening to us on iTunes, please leave a 5-star review. We definitely appreciate all the support, guys. Good luck, and we will see you guys next time.